All right, Larry Krueger here from the Pig and a Pickle Crew Show with a little 49er video as we were in Santa Clara today talking to the 49er coaches. We'll tell you what they told us coming up next. And of course, this video also brought to you by Sharp Corner Sports Cards and Collectibles, 205 Cypress Avenue in Pacific Grove. Call Anthony Catania at 831-521-5264. And of course, Pig and a Pickle, two locations, Emeryville and Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week in both spots. Go say hi to Damon and Mary, get some brisket. Tell them that Krug sent you. All right, let's talk a little bit about today in Santa Clara. Had a chance to talk to a number of the 49ers assistant coaches, and there was a lot of interesting stuff that came out. We'll just do it in order of how we talked to them. So we first started the conversation with Kris Kocurek, talked extensively with Kocurek, and he's an interesting guy, 49er D-line coach. First he was asked, who's replacing Daryl Tapp, and he said Cam Brown, who was a defensive quality control coach. He's going to step in for Tapp. Then he was asked about Nick Bosa, and he said it's nice to have Nick at minicamp, and it's good to have him around the guys, and that he believed that Nick got better against the run last year, that he's always been really good against the run, but that his pass rush last year may have not been great because of the timing and the hand usage, and it may not have all come together for Bosa. We had a chance to talk about Malik Collins. He said, he really liked Malik Collins coming out of Nebraska, and that he says he knocks guards back. He's powerful. He works the edges as a pass rusher. He says he's got a thick, strong lower body, and he's really powerful. He says, I've always liked his skill set to thrive in our scheme. The Niners have an attacking defensive line, and they think Collins is a perfect fit. Then we talked Jordan Elliott, and he said he really liked him at Missouri, that he played for Chris Kiffin and Jim Schwartz, two guys that Kocurek knows well. And he says he reminds him of DJ Jones, just that kind of 320-pound strong frame, can play the run or the pass. He said Elliott can really knock back double teams and take on guards. He's got a strong lower body. He's got strong hands. Then the conversation moved over to Leonard Floyd, and he said how Leonard Floyd really adds length and experience and explosiveness and durability to their line. He says he's very detail-oriented. He's always been productive everywhere he's been. He said there's a relentlessness to his approach. He loves to play. He's passionate about football and about getting better. And so that was interesting to hear. And then we talked about some of the guys who are a little bit lesser known. I mean, he talked a little bit about Shaquille Brown from Troy State. Matt Barrows asked him about Brown. He said the Niners tried to get him as an undrafted free agent last year and lost out on the bidding to the Titans. And then he hurt his ankle and was waived by Tennessee. And the Niners, he said, quickly jumped on the possibility, got on the phone and got him in there as fast as they possibly could. So they really like Shaquille Brown. He also said he really liked Evan Anderson from Florida Atlantic. And the interesting thing is, I mentioned how Anderson, weighed as much as 360 pounds. He said his weight right now is 315 pounds, and that's the target weight they have for him. And he's another guy. He says it reminds him of DJ Jones. He said he's strong with explosive lower body strength. He's got quick feet, quick change of direction, natural leverage player. He says he's really excited about Evan Anderson. And then we talked about Robert Beal and Drake Jackson. And about Beal, he said he needs to get more reps. He said he's had a hammy injury that he's battled, but that he's added 12 to 15 pounds of muscle. He's up over 260. It's the most he's ever weighed. He says he's working hard. And as far as Drake Jackson, he's got to get that knee healthy, but he likes him as a flexible rusher, and he thinks there's some upside potential. I also asked Kris, what it was like last year watching the Detroit film and watching some of his guys not really bringing it 100%. And he's like, yeah, it bothers me. I said, did it bother you? He goes, it bothered me, and it should bother anyone associated with it. And I don't think it's going to happen again this year, but it was clearly, something that he didn't like to see. I mean, Chris's whole routine is play as hard as you can for as long as you can, and then we'll get somebody else in there. And you had guys just kind of going half speed. And he also seemed to say that, while those things got highlighted, he said it really, the real disservice is all the work and all the people that go into making sure the Niners do play at a really high rate of intensity and speed and effort. And he said that he didn't feel like that isolated film that we saw of Givens and and Chase Young kind of Cadillacing in the NFC Championship game was reflective of who they are as a football team or who they are as a defensive line. So, you could see that it bothered him. But I had to ask him about it because it was one of the main stories of last year. Then we had a chance to talk to Brandon Staley, and I didn't get to hear everything Staley said. When I walked in, he said, he reads a lot of books in the off season. He's a big book guy. He likes biographies and, motivational books and how to improve. He says he reads to improve as a football coach. And, I asked him about what were his thoughts from the 49ers, watching the 49ers from afar. And he said he had the utmost respect with them from afar. He says he's seen the growth of the organization since Kyle and John took over in 2017. And he just described the Niners as a really complete football team. He was asked about his role, and he said, he really wasn't very specific. He said game management, it's going to evolve organically and naturally over time. So we're not really sure what Staley is going to do or not going to do, but he didn't address that with any real detail, at least not what I heard. He did compliment Kyle and said he's a complete football coach who could coach offense, defense, or special teams. He says he wants to be around coaches that he feels like can improve him as a coach, and that's why he came to San Francisco. And then he was asked about Brock Purdy, and he said, that he knows Matt Campbell, the head coach at Iowa State, really well. And he's like, first thing you got to remember about Iowa State, he's like, there's not a lot of pros coming out of there. So the fact that Purdy has been as good as he is really is a testament to Brock. And then he made an interesting comment. He said that Brock Purdy lifts the entire team. He says he's a gym rat who lifts up the team by how he prepares for games and how hard he works. And I thought that was an interesting observation, especially from a guy who hasn't been there for very long. And then he compared Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan, and he said they play really differently and how they coach is different, but they're both guys that know all three phases of the game, offense, defense, and special teams. Then we had a chance to talk to Brian Fleury, and I thought this was one of the interesting conversations. I said, well, hey, where's Latu? And he said he's been rehabbing an injury, and that's why he hasn't been out there. And then I mentioned to him that I thought like Latu was going to be a whole lot better, that I felt like he was burdened by the mental overload that he had to go through last summer learning the offense. And he agreed. He said he felt like he was mentally overloaded, that he's a very prideful person, that he wants to come back and that he was dealing with some minor injuries, and that, that he's really truly benefited from his redshirt year. And I asked him, what's the strength of Latu as a player? And he's like, he's really can do it all. He's an inline blocker. He can receive. He can be flexed out. They really like him. Then I told Fleury how much I liked Mason Pline and how I saw some greatness in him. And he agreed. He said, I saw the same things you saw. Then he admitted that Pline's got a lot to learn, but that he's improving at a very fast rate. And that's what the mechanical engineering degree really does for you. When you're really smart and you've got the physical ability, you do improve at a fast rate because you're digesting things. And that's where Pline is. And he said the mental aspect of the Niners offense in Fleury's mind is maybe a little bit greater than some other teams. And it's particularly challenging for the tight ends and fullbacks. And he thinks that's probably why Latu had a rough camp. He said that Pline and the Niners had a mutual attraction, that he wanted to be a Niner and they wanted him to be a Niner, despite the fact that, a lot of prospects look at the Niners and say, well, Juice plays some tight end and there's Kittle, and it makes for a lot of undrafted free agents are very hesitant to sign with them. But he said he really wanted to be a Niner. He said he wanted to play with Kittle. He wanted to play in this offense. And so that's how he's here. I asked, where's Kittle? Because he was not wearing, he was in civvies out on the field the other day, and he says he's still rehabbing. We talked a little bit about the one-on-one drills that him and Kittle worked on during special teams work throughout the year, and how it just reinforces good catching habits. We talked about how there has to be a grieving period after you lose a Super Bowl 58, the way the Niners lost in overtime. He said, you got to grieve, but you got to get over it, and you got to get back at it. And then he admitted that, he did spend a lot of time with the scouts looking at the draft prospects at tight end. We talked a little bit about Eric Saubert, the veteran. He says he's talented. And one of the things that Fleury mentioned about Saubert is that he's got better movement skills than he thought. He also commented how Braden Willis has come in ready to roll, and that he's much improved from last year. And then we talked about how Brian interviewed for the Patriots offensive coordinator job in the offseason. And I asked him, I said, were they just trying to, were they showing lots of interest in you and your story and your family and your, career? Or was it a lot of questions, fact finding questions about the Niners and how they go about doing business? And some teams will use those interviews to try to scout other teams in the league. And Brian admitted, he said, I was very guarded against sharing any knowledge of the franchise with the Patriots during the interview process. He's like, I was definitely on the lookout for that. He said they asked a lot of questions about him individually and not as many, fact finding questions, but he said he was definitely on alert to see if they were going to go in that direction. And then we had a chance to talk to Clay Kubiak, who's the Niners passing game coordinator. And he's interesting. I told him that Brock reminded me of Derek Jeter in that he just says and does all the right things all the time. And he said, he really liked that comparison, that he sees a lot of Jeter in him as well. And then I said, give us something about Brock that we don't know. And he's like, Brock is a really talented thrower. A lot of people are always saying, well, he's got this and that arm and not enough arm strength. He said he's a really talented thrower who plays the game on time and can drive the ball down the field. I also asked him about how Baltimore claimed they had the Niners game plan and that they basically read their mail after they beat them on Christmas night. And he said Baltimore's defense, they had a plan. And what they did was they got home on a couple of cornerback blitzes against some of the Niners' condensed offensive formations. And then once they got the lead, he said they played a very conservative two-shell zone and kind of forced the Niners to play, not give up any big plays and not let them back into it and just force them to drive the length of the field. And the Niners just made too many mistakes to win that game. But he didn't feel like there was some recipe that the Ravens, put on film that everybody else copied from that point on. He just said that he felt like the Ravens had a good game plan, top to bottom. And that's the new head coach of the Seahawks, Mike McDonald, was the defensive coordinator for Baltimore. Then we talked a little bit about Pearsall, and I said, what do you like about Pearsall so far? And he says, we like the way how he separates, that he needs more reps against man-to-man coverage and getting off the line against press man, but that they like his toughness, they like his route running, they like his ball skills, and they like how he separates. And then when we got to talk about Jacob Cowing, he's like, Jacob Cowing is a great football player. My point was, he's not a track guy. And he's like, yeah, this guy wants yards after the catch. He's not a track guy. He's not a stopwatch guy. He's an experienced wide receiver who's been coached very well. And, they think he's a great player. And I thought that was really interesting. And then he talked a little bit about Tanner Mordecai, and he said how Brian Griese was the one who really scouted him. And the thing that stood out about Mordecai to Kubiak was how competitive he is. He says he can make all the NFL throws. He's very smart, very athletic, It says he's improved. He's really, impressed them with how he's learned the offense in a short amount of time. And I said, is there a trait that stands out about Mordecai? And he said, competitive. He said he's a good football player. They're better athletes, bigger athletes, guys with better skills, but this guy's a good football player who's smart and athletic and competitive. And that's what I see as well. So I love to hear that from Kubiak. And then the last guy I talked to was Brian Griese, and he was being asked about Dobbs when I walked up, and he said Dobbs has looked good, that he looked good against the Niners last year, and that's part of the reason they brought him in, but that's not the only reason. That they really like Dobbs as a person, and they feel like he's a great fit for their quarterback room. And then Griese went on to say that the Niners really care a lot about the traits of all their quarterbacks in the quarterback room. And he's like, you need the right guys with the right value system at quarterback, because the quarterbacks are the leaders on the football team, and how they play and how they practice and how they go about their business will be kind of copied and modeled by many of the other players on both sides of the ball and on special teams. So it's really cool. It's really important, vitally important in their mind, that they have the right guys at quarterback, not just the right talent, but the guys with the right value system, the right motivation, the right everything. And then I asked him about Tanner Mordecai, and I said, "Hey, you're the guy who pounded the table for Brock Purdy, and I'm hearing from Kubiak that you're the guy who really liked Mordecai." And he's like, it's early. But he's like, when talking about Tanner Mordecai, he said he's got a lot of ability. He said he had a great conversation in the lead up to the draft with Luke Fickell, the Wisconsin head coach, about Mordecai, and that Fickell, who I guess has been friends with Griese for years, said that of all the players that he had in the draft, that if there was one player that he would jump up on the table and argue for, it would be Tanner Mordecai. And I loved hearing that. And one thing you got to remember about Mordecai is Mordecai broke his throwing hand against Iowa. And like less than 6 weeks later, he's playing in the bowl game against LSU. There's all kinds of guys who sit out bowl games these days. And he easily could have just been like, I'm going to get ready for the draft. I'm going to get ready for the combine. I'm going to get ready for my pro career. And I'm not going to play quarterback in that bowl game, the ReliaQuest Bowl. Instead, he did. He threw for 378 yards and 3 touchdowns and no picks against a really good Tiger defense, really talented Tiger defense. And he never once, according to Fickell, he never once even considered not playing in the bowl game. So that shows maturity and leadership and toughness and the ability to play through pain. And this kid's smart and he's competitive and he's accurate and he's athletic. We're talking about a quarterback who runs 4.46. So, he said, right now Tanner's head is his whole mentally, his head is swimming right now because we're throwing so much at him in a short amount of time. It's like he is where Brock was a couple of years ago. But he's also said, Griese said, I'm excited to see what Tanner can do in training camp. And he admitted that Brock learned a lot in his first couple of years and that Mordecai's in that same spot. And then he was asked about Brock and his Brock getting better. And he said, Brock has mobility and he's efficient from the pocket and he continues to get better. And then he talked about the Super Bowl. What was his mindset after the Super Bowl? And he said, hey, it's unfinished business. We didn't just show up to win a bunch of games or to make the playoffs or to reach the Super Bowl. Our goal is to win the Super Bowl. And so we have unfinished business heading into this year. And then I asked him about Tom Brady because he played with Brady at Michigan. And I asked him, did you see in Brady the special traits? And he's like, he never saw the special traits, but he did see a guy who worked really, really, really hard and was insanely competitive. And at the end of the day, I mean, that's really all you got. You got your competitive fire and how hard you compete. And, how hard do you work? How hard do you work? How hard do you compete? How competitive of a guy are you? What kind of work ethic do you have? And he's like, nobody was going to outwork that guy. He was going to do what needed to be done to work himself into the player that he became. But he said he never saw the level of greatness that Brady, of course, would achieve when they were together at Michigan. So a lot of good stuff, I thought, came out of the dialogue in Santa Clara today. A lot of interesting stuff. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks to Pig and a Pickle for being the title sponsor of the Krug Show. Thanks to our good friends at Sharp Corner Sports Cards and Collectibles in Monterey, along the Monterey Peninsula there in Pacific Grove. Call Anthony Catania at 831-521-5264 for all your sports cards and collectible needs. And thanks to all you guys for supporting the Krug Show on YouTube.